Today we are discussing The Science of Self-Realization by Swami Prabhupada. This is a controversial work on a controversial subject. And this wasn't an easy book for me to get through. It's more the specifics in it that really got me. The overall subject is on Hinduism, which is really important to me. It's something that I really believe in. I'm an omnist and I'm connected to multiple different religious beliefs and spiritual constructs and believe in the sum of all great human thought in the world. But even as I'm still working my way through the depth of the wisdom associated with Hinduism, I can still respect it. And it goes on almost forever, so I don't think I could ever be done with that kind of search. And I'd been excited to read this book, but it really didn't encompass the Hinduism that I have come to know and love. It was recommended to me by someone online as a great read on anybody's spiritual journey. So I picked it up and added to my collection and then eventually went to read it. And it's really about the Hare Krishnas. And if you're not familiar with the Hare Krishnas, they were important back in the 1960s, 1970s United States. In my ignorance, I didn't really know that the author, Swami Prabhupada, was the founder of the Hare Krishnas and that he'd come to the U.S. in the 60s to kind of preach his message. But it did become clear to me, obviously, as I began to read through this book. I was familiar with the Krishnas in a vague sense. Like I said, they were pretty famous back in the 60s and 70s, and I'm not that old, but I've heard people talk about it, seen it in movies. I wasn't really aware of their background or core beliefs. And the modern Hare Krishna movement is regulated and controlled by ISKCON, which stands for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. The movement traces its roots back through the Gaudiya Vaishnava Hindu tradition dating back to the 16th century. So you've got this sect of Hinduism that really came into their own about 500 years ago. And Swami Prabhupada, who founded the modern Hare Krishna movement, consistently refers to the leader who organized them 500 years ago. And he talks about the fact that his line of leadership goes directly back to this organizer. They see the Hindu god Krishna as their supreme deity. And it's a form of Bhakti Yoga, which is one of three Hindu paths to enlightenment or moksha. And what they believe is if they have unbridled, complete faith in Krishna and in this path, that they'll find enlightenment. And they're heavy in proselytizing their beliefs and converting as many people as possible. They're notable for their distribution of literature as books and pamphlets. And they're famous for chanting as one of their primary practices of chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. And this is central to their faith. They were actually a huge influence on George Harrison and the Beatles, as well as many other artists. And they probably had a really notable impact on the spread of vegetarianism in the United States and throughout the Western world. And so Prabhupada speaks often of the four principles, which are avoidance of illicit sex, avoiding meat eating, intoxication, and gambling. And so that was central to a lot of his preaching. And when it comes to the Hare Krishnas, there's, like I said earlier, it's a sensitive subject. I can talk about a friend of mine who I trust very deeply and I respect. And she grew up in the Hare Krishna movement and has had very negative things to say about them. And I put significant stock in their opinion. And there are things that I've read in this book that feel like kind of support this view. And there was also some well-documented issues with the Hare Krishnas and child abuse in the 70s and 80s. Now, they've supposedly done a lot to rectify that over the last 30 years, but I can't be the judge of that. Always do your own research, but it's something that I thought was worth bringing up. We'll get more into some of that as we progress through this discussion, but the whole thing when I read this book felt very dogmatic, which is really strange because I usually don't get that dogmatic feel when I read other literature on Hinduism. And so as we talk about the modernization of the Hare Krishnas, they've undergone a significant rebranding. And like I said, they're like now as we know it, brand is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON. And they usually don't go by their long name. They usually call themselves ISKCON or ISKCON, all caps. And they have global reach and a huge audience. And like I said, they have taken some efforts to address some of the criticisms from the missteps that they've had in the early part of their movement. And again, I can't attest to the effectiveness of these reforms. And I think the topic of ISKCON and the Hare Krishnas movement remains an emotionally charged one. There's a lot of stuff that you can see and find online that has very negative things to say about them. But again, that's for you to judge. And I can say that as we look at the teachings of anyone, even though I didn't particularly resonate with this book and I had some issues here that I'm going to discuss as we move ahead here, I don't think that it means that we can't find some wisdom, even if there's some problems around the subject or the person that is putting it out there. Take Osho, for instance. Some of you may know Osho as a guru, spiritual figure, and he had many great bits of wisdom and guidance, but he was pretty crazy in a lot of people's views, and he had some communities that followed him that did horrible things. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't pick up a book on Osho and find some wisdom. And there's many celebrities and leaders around the world that are tied to ISKCON. And I didn't realize this, but one of my favorite spiritual speakers is Gaur Gopal Das, and he's a member of ISKCON. He's a Hare Krishna, and like I said, I didn't even know that until I was doing research to put this video together. And I've never heard anything from him that wasn't about self-empowerment or loving kindness, and so that really surprised me that one of my favorite spiritual speakers was tied to this movement. So I think that speaks well of at least a portion of the movement currently. But again, you please be the judge. As an omnist, I believe the best movement or practice is that of your own making. So it's up to ourselves to figure out what works best for us. And so let's just continue to work together to absorb all these bits of great human thought from around the world and across time, and make the best of it. So a little bit of background on this book. Swami Prabhupada has written and translated with commentary something like 80 works. So this book was a compilation of his works from various sources, including some magazines that he published, speeches that he's given, and they're actually transcripts of recorded conversations that he's had with people from around the world, like Richard Nixon and his wife, and a ton of other celebrities and world leaders from the 60s and 70s. And so in the beginning of the book, it obviously goes into how he left India and came to the United States to start teaching his Hindu method. And I think the background is really interesting. I think it was one of the most interesting, engaging parts of this book. It describes how he started small and then brought the Hare Krishnas into the mainstream consciousness in the U.S. They were a force to be reckoned with, for sure. And I actually wish the book had included more of this, because it felt very authentic and it felt very kind of more pure before they got big, when they were kind of smaller and more dedicated to their cause, without any of the trappings that go along with kind of dogma when you get into organized religion. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my own personal journey through Hinduism. And, I'm speaking very broadly here. My core interest associated with Hinduism has trended towards the impersonal side and less with the personal side of it. And by that, I mean, there's all these gods and avatars that are quite interesting in Hinduism, but they feel more personal to me. What appeals to me more is the universal kind of pantheistic Brahman, the oneness of everything and our repeating lives in the universe. And there's other powerful insights into who and what we are in this religion. There's conflict between Hindu sects on the impersonal versus the personal within the religion. And so, you can kind of look at that through the same lens as you do a lot of other religions that have different sects or denomination, and they're quite divided. So as it's not this monolithic thing. It's very different based on who you talk to and what their exact practices are. So with that in mind, I expected that I might vibe a little bit less with some things in this book, and that's okay. Just because the Krishnas are very heavy on the personal side, and they do worship a single deity in Krishna, and they believe that there is no salvation outside of the absolute surrender to Krishna, and that's what Prabhupada preached. And I think that, again, goes back to that dogmatic nature of this specific system. And that's not to say that someone that has complete devotion to Krishna might not find their own path. That might be that person's spiritual path, and that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you appreciate this content, I would ask you if you could go ahead and subscribe by hitting the watermark in the lower right-hand corner of this video, or you can subscribe via the channel page. And really, if you're enjoying this content, consider sharing this video with your friends or family who you think might benefit from it. So thank you very much. And on to some more thoughts on this book. Even with quite a few faults, I think Prabhupada is still a fascinating person. He's clearly super intelligent, and this shines through in his writings. And I feel like the way this book was edited did both himself and his movement a disservice. He has all these rich writings and so many good things to say, but the book was kind of organized in such a way that it didn't necessarily show him in the best light. And that's strange because this book is published and distributed by his followers who put it together after he was kind of passed on. But I think if you look deeper into the person, to Swami Prabhupada himself, maybe that's why it was hard for him, because maybe a bit of him did shine through, a little bit of that ego or whatever you may call it, because I think sometimes people's true nature does shine through. And the presence of that ego was strange to me because it's not something I see real often when I'm studying the Hindu tradition. And it's shown me that it's so important to kind of set that ego aside so that you can be more in tune with yourself and even be more receptive and open to the universe and those around you. And I think about what could have been. One of the most striking things about this work is it could have been, I think, much better. And what I was looking for is insights into Prabhupada's concept of this faith, and with insights into how to best practice it and what works for his followers to better their lives. And the book definitely has some of that, but it doesn't feel like it's the primary focus. It ends up being very repetitive, even negative at times. And if you really read it, that kind of just shines through. And it was frustrating given that I think this movement has more to offer in terms of guidance and rich advice. And I think the modern movement, the best that I can tell, has started to kind of take that track a little bit. But I haven't done enough research to really say that one way or the other, for sure. And I don't think this is in any way the science of self-realization, which I think would have been a really fascinating read to read about. How do you realize yourself, the oneness with the universe, the divinity within, pure consciousness? And so it's frustrating that it wasn't that. And I think it was more of a poorly constructed view of the Hare Krishna leader and his 12 years in the United States. And so it just kind of got all jumbled together. And I do want to again say he's brilliant and it does have many interesting things to say. And one message that absolutely does continually shine through, and that I absolutely agree with, is that we need to look inside of ourselves and connect with the truth. And that we need to do this in much larger numbers than we currently are in the world. And if we can do that, we'll live in a better world. And if we don't, it will struggle to live in a better world. And I think that's a good message. I think there's something to that. And if he could spend more time on that, I think, that would have been good. As well as he spent some time on expanding awareness and resisting the material world, meditating, yoga, breathing. Those are great, but it wasn't still, again, the focus of the message that I got. It was just a small part of it. It would have been much more worthwhile to have more in-depth knowledge and wisdom being put out on those subjects. And I will say that his conversation transcripts with some of those important figures I was talking about around the world, those are worth reading. Those are interesting. Although those do sometimes show his ego a bit as well. And that kind of leads me back to, there's some hypocrisy here. And I want to be a positive person. I think I am a positive person most of the time, and I try to remain that way. And I think it's one of the reasons this book was jarring to me is because I was trying to remain positive, but it kept trending negative. And I think I would be doing you all a disservice if I didn't provide an honest picture of what I read. I think most of my books that we discuss on Beyond the Book here on Wednesdays are usually positive, but that just didn't end up that way with this one. I reflect on Prabhupada saying, this is a great quote, actually, God has no particular name. By saying he has no name, we mean that no one knows how many names he has. Since God is unlimited, his names also must be unlimited. Therefore, we cannot settle on one name. And that's really beautiful. It speaks to the oneness of the universe, and it's very pantheistic and very universal. And you've got this beautiful quote, and it really flows this along this omnis universalist path that I follow. And then we know that even if he said this, he didn't necessarily truly believe it, given how dogmatic he was about his way being the only way. And so he was flawed in his take that the only path is his path, and it was a unique and absolute way. And, I don't really believe in absolutes in the universe. Maybe the only absolute that I believe in is change, because I think change is fairly constant motion. But he also claims that these other gurus are falsely claiming to be gods, and they need only preach the path of love and the way to God. And that's a great sentiment. But then he also almost immediately turns around and says it's for his followers to treat him, Swami Prabhupada, as God. And so that is really confusing, because he's criticizing all these other gurus and saying, but I'm different. I'm a guru and it's okay. So it's like he was saying that he was the messenger of God, just like a government official is the representative of a government. In fact, he kind of says that in his book. So this seems a very strange way to present himself. And so you have the wise nature of Swami Prabhupada, and then you have his imperfect nature, as you could kind of see him in the book. It was written, rely on material things. Like he had a Rolls Royce and other finer things, which, that's him. That's okay. I mean, if that's what he's going to do, that's what he's going to do. But it was contradictory to the message that he was putting out in the world. And I think that speaks to the imperfection of humankind. And that's okay. We can find people and fault in people, and severe fault sometimes, and they can still have part of their message be relevant, maybe even warm, or maybe even beautiful. It's a gray world we live in. It's a world of balance of dark and light. And I think even when we're doing good things and trying to make the world a better place, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And, as I continue to read this book, Prabhupada struck me as very authoritarian, very rigid. And those are the words that I wrote down on my notebook at the time, those exact words. And it's striking and jarring in a way that turns me away from what was a beautiful message in many respects. And it's part of a collection of amazing human thought and sincere study. There's something to it, but it's almost like he's holding on too tightly to the subject at hand. It's very arrogant. It trends to the personal versus the interest of the collective. There's this vanity to it. And again, that's the hypocrisy that they could find their true faith and practice, the Krishnas could, according to the great pantheon of this Hindu tradition, but that nobody else was capable of seeing the truth and passing it on. And I think that he also underestimates the ability of people to understand important messages. It was very like, he could understand it and comprehend it, but we wouldn't be able to, so we might as well just take his word for it. And we should only trust him as the messenger. At one point on page 152, I wrote that he is completely narrow-minded. I was so frustrated that I wrote, this guy's narrow-minded, that he can't acknowledge anyone else has anywhere their ideas or practice. And I feel like that's the definition of a fundamentalist, which I think is probably what he and his movement came to be known as in the 60s and 70s and 80s, especially in the United States. I don't know about the rest of the West. And so there's this uneasy thought by him that the West is ungodly versus the East. And that seems kind of condescending. And this is despite him also saying consistently that many Hindus are lost because they're not totally devout to Krishna. And so he's kind of speaking out of both sides of his mouth, whereas he's saying the East is more enlightened than the West, but these Hindus don't know what they're doing. So it's just, again, kind of jarring, which is a word that keeps coming up when I think about this book. He does get a few things right. And what he absolutely does get right is that we need to better ourselves in order to better the world around us and turn things around, that we need mass enlightenment. And this is by far his greatest message and one worthy of all of us. He also gets right that we're all the same and all one without division. And we're all tied together in this oneness. Even if he might contradict that at times. In one section, he boiled it down to a really simple practice of accepting the ultimate Krishna, which to me is what he's saying there is the concept of the ultimate divine, the self, the oneness of the universe. to chant the Hare Krishna, which is chanting a mantra, and that does have power. It can be a ritualistic thing that can help people kind of find their Zen, to resist the material world, to be more aware, to meditate, to do yoga, and to breathe. And if you look at that short list there, it's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's things that I think that if we all did, we would probably have more peace and calm on our spiritual path. And I already spoke to you about the story of his beginning, of his journey from India to the United States and how it all started. And there was some more of this towards the end of his journey as well that they described. And I thought that was powerful as well, how his journey ended. And there was something really relatable about it to me. And I think we needed more of that in this book as well. And so as we kind of look at this book that we've discussed here, what are your thoughts on the Hare Krishnas and ISKCON? What do you think about the movement in the past, maybe the movement where it's at and where it's going? And so let's see if we can have a conversation. Post some stuff in the comments below and let's see what you think. And please visit us at kishar.org for more great content and a vibrant community where we're discussing spirituality every day, subjects like this and others. And please do like this video and give us a like on the video, and we'll keep making content just like this. Until next time, I wish you peace on your journey.